All right, good morning and welcome. Now we're going to talk about valuation, which is hot topic number 5 for the business brokers wanting us to inform you about the process of selling your company. So let's dive right into it. So we're going to talk about the 7 scores that a business buyer is going to look at, and they're going to be internal and they're going to be external. All right, and what do I mean by internal versus external? So internal is going to be within your business. What is it they're looking at on the internal side of your company as far as the valuation? The external are going to be the things outside that you don't have any influence of and you don't have any control over. So let me go into that a little bit and show you what I'm talking about. So this is on the internal aspect of it, okay? So there's 3 things that I've noticed as a serial entrepreneur that myself and other buyers are also looking for, okay? And this is, I'm going to be using loose terms for this, okay? So I want to be able to get the concepts across to you. So on the internal side of your business, they're going to be looking at the assets within the business. And so that may be physical assets, as if you're a machine shop, you're going to have a lot of CNC machines, etc. If you're a car dealership, you're going to have vehicles on the lot. If you're selling products, it's what's on the store shelves. Now, as a service business, if you are a consulting firm or an engineering firm or an accounting firm, then the assets are more going to be about the systems that you have in place and how replicatable that is once they switch owners, that the same systems are going to keep going. Okay, so let's look at 3 different buyers. Let's say we have buyer A, buyer B, and buyer C. And they're going to have very, very different perspectives on what your value is of these 3 items to them. So buyer number A, on a score of 1 to 5, they may score your assets a 5, and they're really, really looking for a business that has a high asset contribution to the company. But they're going to look and say, well, sales, revenues, and customers, we're really not concerned about that. We can deal with that on our own, and IP to them is a factor of 1 out of 5. They're really not looking at the IP of it. So what do I mean by IP? Intellectual property, typically we think of patents, but it could also be that you have a tribal knowledge within your team of how to do something. For example, you may have a secret ingredient like Kentucky Fried Chicken, right? So 11 spices that they had, and they kept that secret a long time. So that'd be intellectual property. They never patented it because they didn't want that to actually be revealed, so they kept it as a trade secret. It could be that your staff know how to do something better than anybody else, and it's a closely guarded secret within your staff of how you do it. You may have a great personality or a certain worksheet that you use, or as an engineering firm, you may use a certain CAD package, and you guys know how to manipulate information in a certain way that no other engineering firm can do. So it could be intellectual property that resides within your company. All right, so now buyer B, they may look and they say, okay, on a scale of 1 to 5, what's important to us when we're looking for a company? They may be completely different than buyer number A and have no concern whatsoever about the physical assets or intellectual assets that are there. But they may say, oh, we're really, really big on sales, revenue, customer base. We're really big about intellectual property. And there may be a buyer C that comes along and just kind of rates all 3 of these aspects as kind of an average. So you can see here suddenly that there's a very, very big difference between each of these buyers about whether they would or wouldn't look at your company. So if you have a company that's high on assets, then you can see really quickly that buyer type A is going to value your company significantly, whereas buyer B doesn't really care. So now you can see that correlation. Okay, so in this case, buyer B is the most likely type of buyer depending on that rating. Okay, so now let's talk about external. And what are the external factors? There's a number of things that come into play that it's really hard as business owners to realize when we're selling our companies, that there's these other factors that we can't see and we can't control. But trust me, as a buyer myself, I definitely am paying attention to these external factors. So let me explain what those are. All right, so on the external factors, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to list what they are, and we're going to say, okay, well, what difference does it make to each one of the buyers? Okay, and let's see, geography could be your city, your region, or even your state, or even country, actually. Okay, so in each of these, I'm going to say that whether the economy is good or bad, how does that influence a different buyer's perspective of whether they want to buy a company, much less their perspective on you. And so this is kind of what it looks like. Is let's say that the economy goes bad or the economy is good, an industry is doing really well or not. So what do I mean by the industry? Some industries are going through a life cycle where they are growing, right? So during the dot-com days, software companies became amazing and there was a lot of growth there and a lot of mergers and acquisitions there. Now we're in 2018, and for the last number of 4 or 5 years since the 2008 recession, machine shops, light manufacturing, mom and pop manufacturing companies have been on the decline. They pretty much all got bought up before the 2008 crash, and there's been very little merger and acquisition activity since then. So that's why the down arrow for the industry indicates very little merger and acquisition activity. Geography, it could be West Coast, East Coast. It could be that you're very geographically dependent on the weather, which also then plays into seasonal. Okay, so geography may be a dynamic where somebody is in the Midwest and they don't want to buy a company in Alaska, they want to buy Midwest. Or they're in the Midwest and they want to expand to the West Coast, and you may have a great business, but it's located in Montana and they want one at least Washington State, maybe Idaho border. So that's a little bit of how the geography plays into that. Okay, so now let's look and say different types of buyers. All right, so again, we have A buyer, B buyer, and we have C buyer. And in these cases, this is what they're going to be interested in. So for the buyer A, they have the best results in their business if the economy is on the downside. So they may have some kind of financial firm, etc., that they do really, really well when everybody is hunkering down and people are not placing bets, and the economy has slowed down. And they may really like a quiet industry. They may, whatever industry they're in, they like the fact that there's not a lot of mergers and acquisitions, etc. Buyer B may just look and simply say, hey, we really, really rate the geographic dynamic as very, very important to us. And again, that's the Midwest wanting to buy a West Coast operation. And so to them, geography is going to play a big difference. And then let's just say that buyer C is going to be somebody that really wants the economy to be revved up big time, and it's very seasonal. So this could be a situation where you are you sell Christmas ornaments or you sell toys, and so therefore the season of the year is really important to you, that Christmas is coming and people are buying gifts, and the economy needs to really be cruising along because people are more willing to spend money. So if you have the kind of business where it makes a big difference that the economy is doing well, it's seasonal, then that buyer type is going to be interested. So what will you find? You'll find, unfortunately, that during the spring, if you're trying to sell your toy company, then you're not going to get a lot of bites because it is not a great time that the Christmas buyers are paying attention. So that's how that influences that. So with both the internal and external, you can now see kind of what's really driving a buyer to decide one way or another. And the fact is that it's more about what the truck is. That's a pretty poorly drawn truck, but you know, that buyer is driving around with money and they're looking for a deal. But the external and the internal has to be in place for them to be able to willing to be stopped at your company and buy your company. All right.